second church history lesson today. This is a double day. You got three church history characters at the beginning, and now you've got one application that I wanted to add here at the end of the day. So we studied 6 characters so far. We saw Justin Martyr, Polycarp, and Irenaeus, and then we saw Tertullian, Hippolytus, and Origen, spending the bulk of our time on Origen. But I wanted to discuss just real briefly the difference between those two groups. One group, Justin Martyr and Polycarp and Irenaeus, were all connected. They all were in some way, shape, or another connected to each other. And indeed, Irenaeus was a student of Polycarp, who was a student of the Apostle John. And when I say student, like I said earlier in the previous video, Irenaeus was actually a student who followed him around and went to Rome with him and studied with him. And just like the Polycarp with the Apostle John was the same way. He followed the Apostle John around. And then you had Justin Martyr, who was also a pastor, who was connected to those other two guys through his proximity to them and through his engagement with Rome. They all kind of knew each other. And so there was this graciousness among them because they had pastoral connection. The other grouping of men were these scholars who were great writers and had incredible influence in history, and they were scholars. They weren't pastors. So there's a difference here. And when we read about those scholars, we tend to admire their thoughts and really admire their passion. But when you dig down deep into who they were, you might not necessarily want to be around them all that much. They were scholars without grace often. And these pastors, in contrast, may have been pastor scholars like Justin Martyr, who was a scholarly pastor, but they had such grace and love for those that they worked with. And Irenaeus, of course, his refutation of heretics is just a great work, and it's very charitable and full of explanation for what he had to defend against. And so I wanted to cite one of the differences here. Authors, writers, and theologians often have a sharper tongue and a sharper pen than pastors do. So when you see a pastor, typically a pastor has a lighter touch, a more gentle touch, a more gracious tone. No one, I think, in modern writing exemplifies this more than maybe Randy Alcorn as an example, who is just incredibly thorough, but also very gracious to other people's points of view. Now, just in your head, think about some of the other theologians that you know of who maybe aren't so generous and kind, and maybe are constantly sharp-tongued and rather cutting. Remember that the primary difference between these two is a connection with a mentor and a disciple. So Origen and Tertullian and Hippolytus, these are 3 men who really had limited contact with a discipler or a mentor. They were mentored through ideas and through philosophies and through studies, and they really lacked a connection with a strong mentor who trained them how to interact with people on a daily basis. Whereas these other 3 men were deeply ingrained with a mentor. So I want to encourage you, especially if you're a young pastor or preacher, or you aspire to be theologically minded and think deeply. I want to encourage you to read the sharp-witted people, to read them, but to couple that with a relationship and a discipleship with somebody who will train you in how to love well. Because all of our knowledge and all of our love and all of our graciousness falls for nothing. It brings us nothing unless we have grace in our knowledge. So all of our scholarly work, it amounts to nothing without grace. So we need to love those around us. And the best way to learn to do that is to identify somebody. So I just want to encourage you, if you don't have somebody to mentor you or connect with you or to teach you, go find one. Go find an old saint. I always say this phrase, oh, a saint does not become a saint overnight. They have to have some time to grow. So you find an old saint who's been at this Christian thing for a while, and then follow their lead. Hebrews chapter 13 says, consider the way of life of your leaders. Consider their way of life and think about its end. Think about what the fruit of their life has brought and aim for them. Now, these great Christian leaders of the faith that we've read about, even the scholars, are people we should aspire to be like. They are famous Christian scholars, and they're powerful influences in church history for a reason. God used them for a reason. So even Tertullian, Origen, and Hippolytus, even they have things that we should look to try and find encouragement and to try and press forward in. But if I'm honest, I want the grace. I want to be known like those men were. Good grief. Polycarp is called the destroyer of gods. And then you read the stories and how kind he is to his adversaries. Irenaeus is called the peacemaker in the midst of everything falling apart and the world going to pot. And then you got Justin Martyr, who stands before the emperor with such charity that they don't know what to do with him. So anyway, I hope that you are enjoying these church history things. I'm enjoying going through them. I'm going to keep doing them, even if you're not enjoying them. So thanks for joining me in the deep end. Now go get to work.